Thank you for that kind introduction, and for you ignoring all the competing attractions. I realise how I wouldn't be here myself if I hadn't got to be on stage and talking to you. So I would like to talk about the role that primates, in particular the great apes and elephants, play in averting dangerous climate change, and why the conservation of those species is not just a matter of, oh, they're nice, we like them, it would be a shame to lose them. That will come into it too. But I wanted, first of all, particularly for those younger viewers who might not be so familiar with them, to indulge me a little bit. Here's an experiment. If I say the word gorilla, what words come to mind? What do you think when somebody says gorilla? Sorry? Monkeys. That's a good start. Gorillas are not monkeys, but they are related to monkeys about as much as we are. They are apes. Good. Yes. People have many ideas about gorillas, and those ideas are sown as seeds in their imagination when young, which is why I'm very glad you're here. The film I'm going to show you now is 2.5 minutes long. It's really exciting for me because although I have what they call a YouTube channel, I mean, it sounds very grand, I stick some videos on YouTube. Most of them get a few hundred, a few thousand, or even a few tens of thousands of views. This one, in the past few weeks, has just topped 3.5 million, which is really exciting because it has no narration, it has no music, it has no production. It is a single shot, so no editing. I can't edit very well. It's a single shot of some gorilla behavior, which I think is self-explanatory. But I want you just for a moment to think you're a behavioral biologist and you're taking notes on what you see. So I'm going to press play and just watch for 2.5 minutes, which is twice as long as most of those 3.5 million. Because YouTube collects stats and they say the average viewing time is 1 minute 15 seconds. I think, what? They missed the best bit. But bear with me for 2.5 minutes. Here we go. Was rescued from the illegal wildlife trade. She's been kept illegally in neighbouring Nigeria, and thanks to a very proactive Nigerian minister, she was rescued from illegal captivity, brought to this sanctuary where she originally came from, Cameroon, and although the sanctuary has a no breeding policy, the best laid plans sometimes go astray, and so she and her friend gave birth. But just watch and see what you would note if you were taking notes for a study of gorilla behavior. Watch this bit, this is good. You got that? Tool use. Infant riding dorsal. It's quite small to be riding dorsal. For the first 2 or 3 months, usually they're riding ventral, clinging on to the mother. Now her friend here, they're not related, they're just friends living in the same large naturalistic enclosure, also had a baby. You've already gone longer than most YouTube viewers, so. We're too far away to hear the vocalizations, but almost certainly they would just be gently vocalizing to each other. So that was it. It's called Gorilla Mums. And what excites me about it is it's self-evident that there's a lot of intelligent behavior going on. These are social beings. They have self-awareness, they understand their position in their society, and although they're in a very unnatural place, I'm going to have to get out of here quickly before it throws up the next thing. Oh. Try switch to the next one. I want people to understand a little bit of what I've understood. I have had the very good fortune to spend years living amongst mountain gorillas. And that was a western lowland gorilla family. They're two different species, now regarded as different species. But the western lowlands were the first to be described. They were only described as a species in 1847. Only a few years after that, an American traveller who had spent part of his boyhood in that area called Paul du Chaillu wrote this book. At the time, it was a bestseller. So I'm excited because 3.5 million people have had that seed sown in their mind by watching a bit of natural gorilla behaviour and just understanding intuitively what was going on. As I say, no narration, no one saying this is really important, just wow, look at that. And for some reason in the past few months, it's taken off and people are sharing it with their friends, and that's why it's up to 3.5 million. And 600,000 were in the last 28 days. So, next month it'll be, who knows? It's really exciting because every one of those viewers has had that seed sown in their mind that gorillas are amazing. They communicate with each other. They have friendships. They have babies that look after them very much as humans do. So you get them on side. And that's really important because for most of that 160, 70 year history that we've known about gorillas, we've had a very different opinion of them. And that was because this particular seed sown by Paul du Chaillu resonates through the literature. Let me read you this bit, if I can find the right bit. It's a book I use for all sorts of reasons. And you might think, well, what are we going to glean today from reading a 19th century hunter's account of... He was the first white man to see gorillas in the wild that wrote about it. There may have been earlier ones that didn't write about it, but he was the first one to write about it. And he writes in this way. Suddenly, his tracker, Miengai, uttered a little cluck with his tongue, which is a native's way of showing that something is stirring and that a sharp lookout is necessary. And presently I noticed ahead of us seemingly a noise as if someone breaking down branches or twigs of trees. So think about this. In the mind of the explorer, you're in darkest Africa, you've got a band of natives with you, you've got your gun with you. This was the gorilla. I knew at once by the eager and satisfied looks of the men. They looked once more carefully at their guns to see if by any chance the powder had fallen out of the pans. This is pre-bullets. A little pan of gunpowder and a spark to fire the gun. The singular noise of the breaking of tree branches continued. We walked with the greatest care, making no noise at all. The countenances of the men showed that they thought themselves engaged in a very serious undertaking. Suddenly, as we were yet creeping along in a silence which made a heavy breath seemed loud and distinct, the woods were at once filled with the tremendous barking roar of the gorilla. Bah! Would have been something like that, but much louder, and coming from a chest 3 times the size of mine. Suddenly, as we were yet... Yes, then the underbrush swayed rapidly just ahead, and presently before us stood an immense male gorilla. He had gone through the jungle on his all fours, but when he saw our party, he erected himself and looked us boldly in the face. He stood about a dozen yards from us, and was a sight I think I shall never forget. Nearly 6 feet high, he proved 4 inches shorter, he said honestly, with the immense body, huge chest, and great muscular arms, and fiercely glaring deep grey eyes, and a hellish expression of face. It seemed to me like some nightmare vision. Thus stood before us the king of the African forest. He was not afraid of us. He stood there and beat his breast with his huge fists till it resounded like an immense bass drum. He goes on for a couple of pages, well, a page and a half about this, and says, his eyes began to flash fiercer as we stood motionless on the defensive, and the crest of short hair which stands at his forehead began twitching rapidly up and down. And now truly he reminded me of nothing but some hellish dream creature, a being of that hideous order, half man, half beast, which we find pictured by old artists in some representations of the infernal regions. And here, just as he began another of his roars, beating his breast in rage, we fired and killed him. With a groan which had something terribly human in it, and yet was full of brutishness, he fell forward onto his face. The body shook convulsively for a few minutes. The limbs moved about in a struggling way, and then all was quiet. Death had done its work, and I had leisure to examine the huge body. That body is in the Natural History Museum in London. I've looked at it. And that description, and I do want to take questions, so yes, what, is this a question or are you just stretching?
No,
it's not a question, okay. You can ask questions, but that was taken at a time when people knew almost nothing about gorillas, and that description was so powerful that it was picked up by R.M. Ballantyne, which some of you may remember if you read Coral Island as a boy or as a girl. These were children's adventure books from the Victorian era, almost word for word. You find that the heroes in here are describing what Du Chaillu saw. But perhaps more regrettably for the gorilla, this book, Du Chaillu's book, was read during the boyhood of an American chap called Merriam C. Cooper. Any film buffs in the house? Merriam C. Cooper, producer of King Kong. So King Kong grew out of a hunter's description of a gorilla defending his family from a hunter. And yet that pictured the world's view of gorillas, and still does. And although that's a 19th century description, it's happening today. I can tell you, because I have colleagues in Kinshasa who are sending me images from the markets there of heads and hands of gorillas on sale, and are trying to crack these illegal rings, capturing baby gorillas to put into the live animal trade. So that is a terrible thing when you think of the suffering involved of an infant whose parents are killed and stuffed in a bag and dragged across the continent and perhaps end up in some wealthy person's private zoo somewhere in the Middle East or in Russia or in China. So we're still fighting that battle. Next month, the parties to the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species will meet in Geneva. They should have met in May in Sri Lanka, but the terrorist attack at Easter caused it to be postponed and then relocated. So we're still fighting these battles to try and curtail the trade. And for many people, that's an issue of animal welfare and species conservation. But I want to take you beyond that. I mean, it's of particular interest just because a few days ago, this paper came out looking for signs of culture in gorillas. Gorilla populations live in different areas. They learn during their long extended childhood, just as we do, and they pick up things from their parents. And even when they're adult, they might pick up things from other members of the group, innovations, differences. And that ability to adapt to a changing environment is really important when we are changing their environment. So gorillas and gorilla culture, all fascinating stuff, but what about the subject of the talk, which becomes even more important when we talk about elephants. This was a paper that literally came out last week. This is my Twitter feed. You can sign on to it at 4apes, and you'll find these recent tweets. So it's almost like the paper was published just in time for this talk. And the point here is that elephant extinction would speed up the climate crisis. Why? Because elephants, if gorillas and orangutans and chimpanzees are the gardeners of the forest, elephants have been described as the mega gardeners of the forest for various reasons. When people think about the value of elephants, they either think about the tourism dollars or they think about their front teeth. And their front teeth from the time of Du Chaillu, who collected specimens for museums, but they've had a commercial value. This is a tusk that was confiscated by customs about 30 years ago. So I've been using it as an educational aid ever since. And what you can learn from this tusk is, this is the root of the tusk, it's just a front tooth, an incisor tooth. The root of the tusk is mostly in the face of the elephant. So only that bit was sticking out. So that tells you this was a young elephant. The speed with which it decreases diameter tells you it's a young male elephant, because females tend to have more parallel tusks, males are more conical. But this would continue to grow. If this elephant had lived the 60-odd years that his allotted lifespan would be, these tusks could almost reach the ground. Big tuskers are seriously impressive. They're carrying around 100 kilo of ivory on their head, which they then pick up and browse and forage, as this elephant is doing in the picture, reaching out using the trunk to gather food items. Now they do that a lot. An elephant eats about 4% of his or her body weight every day. So little elephants don't eat that much, but big elephants eat a heck of a lot. 4% of their body weight. What, a 5-ton elephant? That's 200 kilos of vegetation every day. And they get that vegetation by using their tusks to strip bark off trees, to use their trunk to pull down the branches. And you think of that as a way of the elephant gaining nutrition, but they don't actually have a very efficient digestive system. What I have in here, I believe, is yes, is the really valuable thing that is associated with elephants. It is, of course, their dung. Now, an elephant produces about 200 kilos because they're eating wet vegetation. Most of it passes through. So 200 kilos per day, that's 1,000 kilos in 5 days. So an average, the back of the envelope figure I say was, well, elephants produce about 1 metric ton of first-class organic fertilizer every week. Some of it more, some of it less. Now, at the time Duchaillu was writing about killing those gorillas, we don't know exactly, but we think there was somewhere between 10 and 25 million elephants in Africa, let alone Asian elephants. So just pause for a moment. That's 25 million tons of fertilizer every week being dispersed around the forest. And it's not just fertilizer. Obviously, it's enriching the soils of the continent for the trees and all the other plants to grow. But in that dung are seeds. These are acacia pods. This elephant is actually feeding on acacia pods. I can tell from the vegetation. I don't know which species of acacia, but elephants eat the pods and they digest the casing, and the seeds pop out the other end in fertilizer. What could be a better way to plant trees? So that's what elephants do. They're giant seed distributing and tree planting beings. Also beings because they have self-awareness. And that's what people tend to forget when they're talking about the ivory trade. They see the images of the mutilated elephants. They see the profits made by criminal gangs. And we campaign to change the attitude of ivory so that it's not a status symbol that you want to put on your mantelpiece. Because if you're putting an ivory carving on your mantelpiece today, what you're saying is, I support organised crime, the murder of rangers and customs officers, and the killing of an endangered species, because elephants are endangered. The current estimate of their population is about 400,000. Now, 400,000 doesn't sound like your usual endangered species. You know, there's only 1,000 mountain gorillas left, just over 1,000, and that's an increase on the past few years. So elephants don't sound endangered when you're thinking about hundreds of thousands. But if you remember that even if the estimates were 10 million, that means we've lost 95% in a couple of generations. When my grandparents were kids, probably reading Ballantyne's The Gorilla Hunters, their parents were around when there were 10 million or more elephants in Africa, and probably a similar number across the subcontinent and Southeast Asia, down to Borneo and Sumatra. And there are still elephants in those places. There are 50 countries in the world with elephant populations, naturally. 37 in Africa and 13 in Asia. Almost all of them want the ivory trade to stop. 3 or 4 of them in southern Africa think they have more than enough elephants, they can't cope with them, and they want to sell the ivory still. And so that same old argument that we've been having since 1989, when CITES banned the international trade in ivory, is going to be held again next month. Watch out for it. And almost nowhere, unless people are interviewing me, will they be saying, this is a climate issue. This article has nothing to do with me. It's so exciting to see other scientists picking up this, because elephants plant trees. Why is that important? Let me do a little exercise for you. If we go to here and go into here and go T341. If you're taking notes, this is what you do. It's not a jigsaw blade that I'm looking for. Let's add in the word precipitation. Right. There we go, straight away. This is, I think, one of the best illustrations of why the tropical forests of the world are important that you can find. And we can go to full screen. It's an animation of global precipitation patterns where white is water vapor and orange is precipitation, rainfall, or in the colder areas, snow or hail. So just watch it. You've got a clock up here. The days are ticking by at about 1 a second, and the hours faster than you can count. And it seems that in the Congo Basin, there's an orange flash every second. That's because it rains every day. The clue's in the name, it's a rainforest. But what most people don't realize, it doesn't just rain in rainforests. Rainforests generate rain. Evapotranspiration is the process by which trees take moisture from the soil, the mycorrhizal mats in the fungi in the soil, helping the roots take water up, pumping it through the tree and out through the leaves and into the atmosphere. The scientists at the Global Canopy Programme in Oxford estimate that a unit area of tropical forest, whether you're square miles or square kilometres, whatever, puts about 8 to 10 times more water vapour into the atmosphere than the same area of ocean. Obviously, there's lots of evaporation from the ocean, but forests have giant pumps. It's been described by 2 Russian physicists as biotic pumps, which are pumping water vapour up. And if you watch the weather patterns, you can track them. From the Congo Basin and Guinea, they move westwards across and they join the bigger pump in the Amazon. So who'd have thought that African rain is actually ending up in the Amazon? And then watch where the Amazon pump goes. Well, some of it bounces off the Andes and comes across and waters South Africa and Australia and New Zealand eventually. Some of it goes up and waters the Midwest, the Corn Belt, and then comes across the Atlantic and waters Gloucestershire. So if you're a farmer in Gloucestershire, you're getting rain that's part of this global system. And what drives that system? The tropical forests, particularly in the Amazon basin, the Congo basin, and the complicated massive islands in Southeast Asia, Borneo, Sumatra, New Guinea. That's what makes the world's weather work. Forests. And yet the rate of deforestation hasn't gone down to 0, which is very worrying, because at the time when we realize that we need to remove CO2 from the atmosphere, that's what plants do. You heard it earlier today in this very room. They're the ones that take carbon dioxide, release the oxygen and store the carbon. They are the best carbon capture and storage machines that evolution can make. And who plants the trees in tropical forests where all this activity is going on of global significance? Not people. I mean, people do plant trees sometimes, but mostly it's animals. In England, we have a lot of wind-dispersed tree species like ash and sycamore. But in the tropical forests, between 75 and 96% of tree species, and there are far more tree species in a tropical forest than in a temperate forest, most of those tree species have their seeds dispersed by animals. So animal conservation has to be an integral part of our efforts to save the rainforest. People think, oh, rainforest, yeah, lots of trees. Trees without animals are not a forest. Those are literally sticks of carbon. And when those old trees die, if there haven't been animals dispersing the seeds, then those trees will not regenerate. Some of them might, but not the majority of them. And what will happen is that as light gaps open up, a tree falls down, pioneer species will come in, a fast-growing light wood. So the subject of that paper that just came out was that elephants not only disperse the seeds, they thin the seedlings and saplings. Because elephants say, oh, elephants destroy trees, and they do. They eat a lot of vegetation. And I say, well, it's like pruning, but not just pruning the branches, which causes bushiness as you take out the apical meristem and lateral branches grow, but they're thinning the growth, which means you get more in an elephant habitat in the Congo Basin. You get more trees that are huge and store a lot of carbon and have a denser canopy compared to where there aren't elephants, because then there's lots of undergrowth. So it changes the architecture of the forest. Elephants are so important that you might wonder why there aren't any in the Amazon rainforest. Well, I mean, there are tapirs there, and the primates there are not gorillas and African monkeys. You've got wakaris and spider monkeys and all sorts of interesting primates. So it's happening there, but a lot of the South American megafauna disappeared when humans arrived. So humans do have this effect, and it's speculated that because humans probably evolved in Africa, the megafauna in Africa adapted to humans. Their behavior changed and they got to live alongside each other. So the key take-home message is that species conservation, when you're talking about keystone species, now keystone species is an ecological term that takes the analogy of the keystone in an archway. There are places here where there's nice archways, and you can see the keystone is the one in the middle. You build a frame, you stack the stones up, you put the keystone in, then you can take the frame away and it all stays up there. So a keystone species plays that role of holding everything together, and elephants are the archetypal keystone species for the forests and savannas of Africa and Asia. And in other parts of the world, other species will play that role. And their conservation is essential if we are to prevent dangerous climate change, because we need those forests. As Prince Charles famously said, if we lose the fight against deforestation, we lose the fight against climate change. And he's thinking of trees. I wait to hear the time when he says, and those trees are planted by primates and elephants and hornbills and, because of fruit-eating birds that don't destroy the seeds also disperse them. So that's kind of the take-home message. But this is a seed festival, and we're trying to sow seeds of ideas. And how do you get people's attention in this world of so much information? And a lot of our young people spend a lot of their time inside VR headsets. Inside VR headsets, playing games about made-up worlds where you can kill monsters and shoot down your enemy and all sorts of exciting things. But it doesn't teach you anything apart from perhaps faster hand-eye coordination. Might make you a good fighter pilot if you join the RAF. But we're trying to use that, that is we, one of these, let's escape from that and go into this one, vcotourism.org, V for virtual. So if you have you guys got a VR headset at home, gentlemen? No. These are really cheap. Because literally, 10, 15 pounds, you can buy one of these. There's no electronics in it. Your phone, or your parents' phone, is the electronics. You clip that in there, and then you can go on a virtual safari. So we're doing virtual safaris to take people to the habitat of the great apes, of elephants, so that they can be immersed in it and be excited by it, in the hope that they will then want to, well, that seed will be planted in their mind. So can you use modern technology to promote conservation? I think so. Books are still important. Propped up at the front here are two books that I've been recently involved with. It's a series of books called Remembering Wildlife. So if you can remember that, Remembering Wildlife, you'll find them. This one is the second one that came out. Remembering Rhinos was first, then Remembering Elephants. And I wrote a bit in this, which I picked up and read because I thought I'd show you this. Not many of my books are still in print, but these two are. And every penny of the book sale, if you buy these online, goes to conservation because they've already been paid for. The lady who set up the Remembering Wildlife series, Margot Raggett, runs a crowdfunding campaign to raise the money to publish the books. And that means that the books are total profit for conservation. And I wrote this... which I looked at this morning and thought, oh, that's good. I wish I'd written it. And then I realized, of course, I did. It says in the essay called Why Care About Elephants? Superlatives swirl around African elephants. They are the biggest and heaviest land animal with the highest reach, higher than a giraffe if they stretch up on their back legs, the longest nose, incisors, and gestation period, the biggest ears, and a brain 4 times the size of ours. Their complex, multi-tiered society is coordinated by long-distance infrasonic rumbles we can't even hear. And they demonstrate self-awareness, which makes them elephant beings who show compassion and reason. So amazed are we by their appearance and cognitive abilities that even in a book devoted to big, beautiful pictures, and these are photographic books where 50 or 60 of the world's best wildlife photographers donate images. They are fantastic. We have them propped open on the side because you get a different poster every time you turn over. Even in a book of big, beautiful pictures of elephants, we are in danger of forgetting the bigger picture. That is what elephants have evolved to do. So I go on to explain some of what I've just been saying about the amount of droppings they produce, which fertilize the forests where they still live, and the role they play in dispersing seeds. I didn't talk about the thinning of trees because that's just been published. So some of the research that's going on now that explores the ecological role of elephants is really exciting because you can now, if you follow me on Twitter, I'll keep you up to date. Just bang, you can get information out there very quickly, which is exciting because that does suggest that we can change things. And we need to change things because at the moment, in some areas where they're well protected, elephant numbers are beginning to recover. But across Africa, in most of the places where they used to live and play that critical role in the ecology, they're not there. So the soils are being depleted. If you clear a forest, you take away the nutrients, and there's very little in the soil. You need elephants coming through and defecating, and other mammals, and even caterpillars. You know about frass, the rain of caterpillar poo that falls in forests, that's fertilizer for the trees to take up. So I was going to say a little bit about how frustrating it is that much of the information, one of the common themes you hear in these talks during this festival, is that the truth isn't out there. Despite what Mulder and Scully would have said, the truth is known but not disseminated. Why is it that the mainstream media has literally in the past few months suddenly woken up to conservation and plastic pollution being an issue of public concern? Well, thanks to my good friend David Attenborough, who has, I would say finally, I mean for years he has been criticised for just presenting this beautiful planet and getting people interested because of the beauty of the films he makes, but he is more and more, I wouldn't say extreme, but firm in his pronouncements about the issues that we're facing. Many documentary makers make films about these issues, about conservation, about environment, about human rights abuses, about social justice issues, and you can't find them. If you go to a film festival, you might see one, and it wins an award, and then it disappears. They very seldom make it onto the mainstream media. So I'm involved with a team called EcoStreams with a Z, because the chap who set it up is from California, and that's how they spell things funny. But look up EcoStreams, and it's like Netflix for environmentalists. You know when you watch a documentary, and it grabs your attention, and you're following the story, and you get to the end, and you're thinking, oh, I didn't know that, what can I do? What do you see? Bang, there's a new drama series, if it's on BBC. Or bang, buy a car, here's a washing powder. You have no moment of reflection, and no moment where you can think, I'd really like to do something to help solve that problem. EcoStreams, in its relaunch, which will happen in a few weeks' time, will give you that opportunity. If you're moved by something, you might want to download a report, buy a bumper sticker or a t-shirt. You might want to organize a screening with your local scout group. So working with different NGOs and film festivals to try, I'm hoping that maybe next year the Seed Festival will be streaming the films on EcoStreams, because that Friday night film show of films in this very room, I don't know how many of you here saw that, but particularly the Sharkwater Extinction, such a moving film. Needs to be seen by people everywhere, and yet it's really hard to find a place to see it. So that's a sort of film that we're trying to do. We're trying to sow seeds using modern technology. The internet is a wonderful thing. We know it has environmental consequences and it can be used for bad, but it's like any human tool. It's like money. It's not money that's the root of all evil, it's a love of money that's the root of all evil. And if we can use this modern technology to sow seeds in people's minds, get them involved, and for some people it's a very direct link. If someone's thinking of buying an ivory knick-knack when they're on holiday, obviously don't do it. If someone's thinking of eating in a restaurant that serves exotic meats, and you think it's really cool because you're eating an unusual species, ask the question, well, where does that meat come from? What was the life of the animal? Are you helping to deplete the very ecosystems that we need to continue to make our biosphere a functioning whole, which it was and potentially still could be if we stop the deforestation, the biodiversity loss, the problems that we're here to address. And I'm really glad that a largely environmental festival would have a talk about wildlife issues, because sometimes people who are interested in natural history and wildlife are seen as separate from the environmental movement. And you certainly get that impression on the documentaries. It's either wonderful about the natural history and the amazing modern filming techniques can reveal so much more that the 19th century child would never see. He'd be looking at an image, a black and white print like these, which show a distant land in a way that is very hard to get your head around. But today we can take you there virtually. We can show it to you on your television, either mainstream media or specialist channels. And what you do with that information is kind of up to you. And that's the jump we have to make. And I'm being given a wrap-up signal, so I will wrap up now. But if we have some time for questions, let's have a bit of a discussion. I didn't get you to do the word cloud that I was going to get you to do after seeing the gorilla footage at the beginning. I don't know what words come to mind after watching that little bit of gorilla behaviour.
Okay.
Yeah, yes, okay.
Done?
Yeah, done.
Can we say a big thank you?
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. That was brilliant.